Jason?
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, hello, everybody.
I'm Atticus Garrison, and I'm here with Jason Ertz today, and we're going to be doing kind of a part two of a previous presentation that Neil Rock hosted. That previous one was hosted by the Professional Development Committee. I believe it was titled "What is ChatGPT and Why Should I Care?" In that session, we kind of went over the basics of what ChatGPT is, some applications and things to think about for us in higher ed. We're going to take that ball here with the Information Literacy Committee and run it a little bit further with Generative AI Deep Dive, Implication, Ethics, and the Future of Librarianship. And today, Jason and I are going to kind of run through some applications and implications for us as librarians. This is going to be a very librarian-centric presentation in the first part, as opposed to higher ed in general. And then we're going to kind of think about some of the ways that we can use generative AI. Should we use generative AI? And if we do end up using generative AI, I'll hand it over to Jason in the second half to think about some of the ethical implications of the use of a technology like generative AI. So I guess I'll start off with introducing us and what kind of drew us to this discussion and how we've been interacting with generative AI at our respective institutions. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Atticus Garrison. I'm a reference and instruction librarian at Blackhawk College. And a little over a year and a half ago, there were a whole bunch of news articles, when the deluge of ChatGPT articles started coming out about, it's going to be the end of higher education, it's a cheating machine, all of those kind of articles started swirling around at my particular institution. There was a lot of concern. There was a lot of worry about what are we going to do to address this. And I kind of looked around and there weren't many that were tackling that issue. And so I thought, well, information literacy, digital literacy, understanding technology is a part of the core pillar of what we as librarians do. So I started looking at ways of incorporating information about generative AI and ChatGPT into instruction sessions, both for faculty and students. And I believe, Jason, you did something similar. What's been your experience working?
So I've been trying to bring it into the classroom and trying to encourage students to understand its implications and really how to use generative AI and these language models more of an assistance to the kinds of work we do and not an avoiding of learning. So I always want students to don't use it to avoid learning, but use it to help you learn. And that's kind of where I've been going and trying to get them to use it as a tool for generating ideas, these kinds of things that we'll kind of discuss today. So I've been getting in the classroom because our faculty here also kind of flipped out when the news came out and all these kinds of things. We all kind of have seen it. And I think as librarians, it's something we can help the faculty kind of, tamp down the panic to a large degree. Yeah.
For sure. Well, I guess we can get the ball rolling then. So for those of you that saw the previous presentation, the next few slides are going to look a little familiar. I'm going to do a quick getting everyone up to date on this is kind of a version of the presentation I've been giving to students and faculty, just a general overview of what generative AI is using ChatGPT as an example. So I'll be a little bit more brief than what I did in the previous presentation, just to kind of get everyone on the same page about what generative AI is and how does it work. So generative AI is a general catch-all term for any sort of program that takes in an input text and then generates a text output as a response. It's built on transformer architecture, which is kind of The quick explainer to what that means is back in 2017, there was a Google employee that was able to train software to understand why sentence structures are the way that they are, understanding why a sentence works the way that it is. It's not, it matters the order in which the words that we use are in the order that they are. And so training software to be able to understand and interpret information in that way is the breakthrough that has allowed all of these different generative AIs that you're seeing today to exist. GPT-3, which is what the free version of ChatGPT is trained on, was trained on over 8 million sources pulled from the open internet. So think Twitter, Facebook, Quora, any openly accessible site on the internet that was likely used to train ChatGPT. GPT-4, which is the most up-to-date version of the GPT of OpenAI's large language model, was trained on significantly more. And as Jason's going to talk about in a bit, OpenAI is now being a lot more close-lipped about what exactly that training data is that the more recent models have been trained on. So generally speaking, what's happening when you give ChatGPT a prompt is it will first encode the input text, so break down the input text into a numeric value that the model can understand. Then it will generate the most mathematically likely response to that prompt. And I'll go over in a little bit how it determines what the most mathematically likely response is. And then it decodes that numeric value back into readable English. So the example I like to use is with my own institution. So where is Blackhawk College located? It breaks down that prompt into numeric value. It then generates the most mathematically likely response to that prompt, and then it decodes it back into Moline, Illinois. So here's a quick overview of how that data was trained. So the first step of the process is entirely person-driven, right? So a person would write out the prompt, where is Blackhawk College located? And they would write out the response to that prompt. So where's Blackhawk College located? Moline, Illinois. And they do that with hundreds and hundreds of prompts, and all of that data is fed into the model for what an acceptable response is supposed to look like. During step 2, the model starts generating responses on its own, and then a real person, again, will rank from best to worst how they think those responses are. So where is Blackhawk College located? Maybe it would respond Moline, Illinois, the Quad Cities, which is kind of our broader area that we're located in. It might say Galva, Illinois, because we have an East Campus out in Galva. And then maybe it would have a fourth response of San Francisco, California, right? So the labeler would go in and would start making judgment calls. And this is something that we're going to touch on in a bit. So, they would maybe rank Moline, Illinois first, Quad Cities second, Galva, Illinois third, and then because we're not located in California, San Francisco would be ranked the lowest. Now, I want to draw attention to the fact that at no point in this process is there a fact-checking mechanism or a removal of bias mechanism, right? So the training data is the open internet, which I know everyone is aware of is the least biased and least toxic place you can think of. Then you have real people that are also inputting bias in the form of the prompts and responses, and a person that is giving judgment calls on desired responses as well. So there's 3 layers of human bias being input into this system. Then we get to step 3, where the model is performing steps 1 and steps 2 entirely independent of human input. And by that point, it becomes the model that we interact with today with prompt inputting and outputs. So then I would segue into the next part of my presentation to either faculty or students with this quote that I really like from Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, who says, ChatGPT is incredibly limited, but good enough at some things to create a misleading impression of greatness. It's a mistake to be relying on it for anything important right now. And then I'd go into some of the limitations of this technology. Where does it fail? So sometimes it's not helpful. Sometimes it has a lack of interpretability. So its input and outputs are kind of gobbledygook, or you can't make sense of why it does that. The main limitation or flaw that I like to point to for us as librarians, as people that are purveyors of good information, good sourcing, is it hallucinates, which is the term they use for it makes things up or gives wrong facts or fake facts, fake information. It will output things that just don't exist. And it will also generate biased and toxic outputs because it's been trained on the wide internet, right? And so as I kind of already touched on, if the data itself that it was trained on is biased, it is very hard to pull that out for the final product that we use. And it sucks at math. So stick to your calculators and do not rely on these large language models for that. So then I would usually go through a few examples of the limitations, but we're in the deep dive. So we want to, if you want to see those examples, watch our previous webinar. And so after I go through examples of those limitations, I leave the class by saying, remember, it's a mistake to be relying on it for anything important. Use it as a tool, not as a source of information, which Jason kind of touched on a little bit already. And I also leave them with a final Sam Altman quote. I probably trust the answers that come out of ChatGPT the least of anybody on Earth. So I want to pose this question and give a few answers. So I really hope we can get to a Q&A session at the end here, because we're going to be posing a lot of questions that don't necessarily have answers to yet. So what is the role of librarians regarding generative AI? Where do we step in? So some of the ways that Jason and I have already stepped in at our respective institutions is incorporating talk about generative AI into instruction sessions, both with faculty and with students. One of the ways that I've been interfacing and interacting with faculty at my institution about this is going to department meetings, informing people, giving presentations similar to the one I'm giving right now, informing the faculty about how it works, how they can massage their assignments to have generative AI in mind, these large language models in mind, both how they can use it for assignments, or how they can frame their assignments to where it's harder and more difficult for students to use it as a replacement for their own thought and their own writing and their own work. I also have assisted with drafting policies as well as those assignments, and I'll go over some of those examples in a bit. Gone over and warned about the limitations of AI plagiarism checkers, which I'll cover in a little bit as well. And as well, I've made a LibGuide. If you're interested in seeing the LibGuide that I made for my institution, feel free to borrow components of it if you find it useful. And I often go into these faculty presentations with this slide. So this is from ditchthattextbook.com. I don't know what that website is, but I love the graphics, so I use it frequently as a way to kind of get the ball rolling on rethinking the binary. Did they cheat or did they not cheat using this technology as that? So it goes from fully chatbot created content on the top, and then fully student created content on the bottom of the slide. And as you can see, there's a lot of muddied waters in between. So if you consult it for brainstorming ideas, does that cross a line for the faculty member where you're replacing or offloading thought or work? And different faculty members in different course disciplines are going to draw the line at different spots on the rung of this ladder. So it's a good kind of prompting to get them to think about, okay, where's the line for you in your class, right? It's not saying there's a right or a wrong place to draw the line, but you need to think about it more like a spectrum than a binary. Ideas for syllabus updates, personal reflection being an important component throughout the term, getting students to interact and interface with their own learning in smaller broken down assignments throughout a term, especially in a class that typically would have a large essay assignment at the end and nothing else. Scaffolding that throughout makes it easier to check in on your student to get an idea of what their voice is, because ChatGPT, for as great of a writer as it is, cannot take the student's voice unless the student is heavily interfacing with ChatGPT. And I love to hammer home with faculty to make expectations clear. That's the best way for all of us to move forward. If the students understand what the expectations are, they're more liable to fall in line with those expectations. And here's an example slide of a reflection of what that range of policies could be. So I won't make you all read it. You will all be sent the slides after this to look over it, but kind of the point of this slide is to show that there's a range of policies that you could create. So option one being you're not allowed to use generative AI at all in this class. Option two is generative AI is permitted with permission. So a student has to ask, hey, I would like to use generative AI to help brainstorm with an essay. And the faculty member would say, yep, that's fine. Show me, a screenshot of your session and you're good to go. And then the third option is broader, just accepted use of the generative AI within certain constraints. So this can be helpful for faculty to conceptualize what use of generative AI will look like in their class in particular. And then, like I mentioned, you cannot trust the AI plagiarism checkers. They are flawed. One exercise that I found the most helpful is if your faculty have written an essay or written a journal article or literally written anything that was published, have them put their own materials through the plagiarism checkers and be astounded by how much of it comes back as being AI generated, because these checkers, there's no like smoking gun or way to identify it. AI written material, there's just certain benchmarks or certain things that it's looking for in terms of like the range of grammar, how perfectly formatted things are in terms of English. So there's no way to be 100% sure that something was written by AI, and there's a lot of stuff that gets flagged as false positives. So instead, rely on kind of, if you feel your spidey sense tingling is the words that I use with faculty. So if you have multiple assignments that are keeping track, keeping tabs on your student, you get an idea for their voice, and it becomes very apparent when that voice shifts. And it will often just feel wrong. So having those repeated check-in assignments is very helpful for that purpose. And here's a few examples. So the AI detectors flag the US Constitution as being AI generated, which is either a revelation for all of us about the state of the founding fathers, or you just can't rely on these plagiarism checkers. So how to incorporate into library instruction? What is generative AI? That can be where we can step in to teach about that. Where and how should it be used? Collaborate with faculties to ensure that AI policy is something on their radar. This is a way that I've sort of gone in this term to be more embedded in my classes, if that's something that has been a goal for you. Disinformation, generative AI are ways to say, hey, I can, teach a session on, how to use the library databases and how to search and do general research tutorials like we typically do. But I could also meet earlier in the term if you want me to cover, generative AI and what it is, right? And so now I'm meeting repeatedly throughout the term because I brought this up to the faculty. Same with source evaluation. There are many news sites that have started to rely on generative AI to write some of their articles or to edit their articles. So having us in the class for source evaluation is going to become even more important going forward. And there are also applications to our day-to-day job as well in how we interface with catalogs and databases. So there are already search engine integrations in the form of Bard and Bing, as well as certain databases that are already being driven by generative AI, like Consensus AI. There's also significant disinformation potential. There are news sites that are both trying to be helpful and trying to get more work out there quicker, so they're relying on generative AI, but there's also opportunity for malicious actors to rely on generative AI to write more bad sources quicker. And so here is an example of Consensus AI, that database I mentioned. So the way it works is you write out whatever your research question is, right? So you don't need keywords, booleans, anything like that. So what is the evidence to support the existence of climate change and its effects? It will then give you a summary of what the scholarship says on this topic in general. And then it gives you the specific sentences or sections of the articles that address your research topic before it lets you click on whatever the article is. And all these articles are real articles. I know that's a concern that it sometimes makes up things, but because it's being grounded to real sources, the outputs the generative AI is a facilitator to get you to a real source as opposed to a replacement for a source of information. Here's another example of, is caffeine good for you? In Consensus AI, also, if you ask it a yes or no question, it will give you a little consensus meter over on the right-hand side of how many articles generally support that caffeine's good for you or generally don't support that it's good for you. Yep, and it's called, thank you, Brian, it's called Consensus AI, and there's a link on the slide as well that kind of gives you a general overview of the database and how it works. And I don't necessarily have any connection with Consensus AI. It's just the first cleanest example of what I think is coming down the pike in the next 10 years for us, assuming that this technology keeps advancing at the rate that it is. And then here's a few examples of Bing's current search integration. And it has GPT-4 plugged into the traditional Bing search. So I asked it, what are some search terms I could use in databases to find articles about the 2023 train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio? And it gave me some ideas for search terms I could use. I then asked it, out of all the databases available on the Blackhawk College library website, which ones would be best to continue researching on this particular topic? I would say Academic Search Complete and Opposing Viewpoints are two good ones. I don't know if ProQuest Central is the best one, but serviceable answer for something that wasn't trained to be integrated in this way. I then had it do a search, perform a search based on those search terms that it outlined, and it then cited the results that it found. And because it was a facilitator of getting to the information, all of these citations are real websites that you can get to. When I had it draft an MLA citation page, it forgot to grab the author names, but generally speaking, it did a good job of finding me articles relevant to that topic. And then there's the disinformation potential with this technology. So this is an article that goes over how repressive regimes are already attempting to use this technology as a way to suppress certain viewpoints. So it used to be back in the day, before generative AI, you would censor certain words. So if you were in a country that didn't want you talking about a certain event, you would censor specific words around that event. But now with generative AI, you can tell the generative AI, hey, censor discussion about this topic, and it will be able to infer certain ways around it. So instead of just coming up with double words or coded language, it starts using context clues to censor speech further. And there's other implications that I'll go over as well. Deep fakes. So as you can see kind of in the background of this post, there are some photos of Melania Trump being very distraught as Donald Trump is pulled away by police. None of these photos are real. They were all generated by AI image generators. And there was a period where a lot of these images were generated in a very short period of time, leading folks to believe that Donald Trump had been arrested. Oh, you don't see the images. Well, that's no fun. The images depict Donald Trump being pulled away by police officers and Melania Trump being distraught. Sorry about that. That's strange. Anyway, so the deep fake technology can be used to generate any image. And while it's not a perfect one-to-one match with reality, it's good enough if it looks like a thumbnail on a news story to trick many people. Generative AI also allows people to get around certain blocks, as I mentioned, when repressing speech. It also can be used for generating a lot of articles and disinformation in a very short period of time. Chatbots are already being plugged into existing social media bot networks to push more sophisticated manipulation campaigns. At this point, I see there's a question about, is there a way to determine fake images outside of the eyeball test? So like looking at people's hands, because generative AI is typically awful at making people's hands. There's not a one-to-one perfect way of determining a fake image from a real image that I'm aware of off the top of my head, unfortunately. Just like with the AI plagiarism checkers, there is no hard and fast way to determine that.
So here's a quick example of at least 50 news websites that are relying on AI generated content. One of the main examples that it used is there was a celebrity death announcement website that just fired all its staff and started relying exclusively on ChatGPT. And within, I think, 2 days, I think it was within 48 hours, it had started writing articles about celebrities that had not died. So it made a big announcement that went viral that Joe Biden had died and Kamala Harris was set to take over. And then the website owner just shut it all down when he realized that he could not rely on the generative AI to not make things up. Here's another example of a website where a user with access to the API, so kind of like the back end of GPT, was able to have GPT-4 code a website for him and have that website automatically write and publish articles to put on the web. Now, there was no malicious intent behind this. He just wanted to see if he could do it. So the website generated like 7,000 posts within a week of being plugged in. And the posts generally are just articles about, like, this is the Oakland Raiders, or I don't even know if this is X sports team out of this location. I just realized I dated myself with that. But this is X sport team in this city, and here's some general facts about it, right? So the articles weren't malicious, but a malicious actor with $40 could create a website and flood it with articles about any kind of topic going forward. And that's kind of where I'm going to hand it off to Jason to continue us down this path, talking about the ethical implications of this technology.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Atticus. So one of the things we have to do with a lot of this information is really think in more broader terms and think about how this might affect us at large, both as society and of course in the education realm. And if we want to incorporate generative AI into our work, into the work that we do with students, then we really must consider and think about with our faculty, with our administrators, the ethical implications around that. And so that's kind of where we're going to go with this. So again, kind of building off of Atticus's discussion here on disinformation problems, disinformation is going to be as you all know, it's kind of a continual issue for us. It's not going away at all. It's just now I think it's going to be a little bit harder to kind of work through as we're dealing with disinformation and censorship. Lee McIntyre in his book here says, in a society that still has a free press, disinformation is the new censorship. And an example of this, I think, is important to consider. And as we think about the example Atticus gave us just a few moments ago on the gentleman who created a website and 7,000 posts in like a week. What this means to make disinformation a censorship is that if you have a kernel of a post or a kernel of truth out for people to see, and if I bombard it with 7,000 posts that are just insanity, or useless fake posts, disinformation campaigns, and all these things, you've essentially censored the truth by flooding it with information, with false information. And I think that's how we're seeing that happen currently. But now, prior to, I think, the periods now, people had to kind of create those articles by hand. Now, if you can generate 7,000 in a week, you can imagine what the flood will look like when we're trying to find those truths. And that's a serious ethical implication for the kinds of work that we have to do. So that's a real problem. The other real question about disinformation and censorship, kind of the ethical problems around that, are what exactly are we feeding the chatbot? Right, Atticus had brought this up a little bit earlier. What is the data that we're training the chatbot on? Do we know? Is it good information? Right? If we're training the chatbot off Reddit posts and Quora, God help me, whatever is being said in there, right? And so we have to think about what are we actually feeding these beasts? How is it trained? Who's training it? And how does that affect things? That can be really a big issue. For example, this Warcraft hoax that went on here. Some company was kind of scraping a Reddit post on World of Warcraft game, right? And he was generating AI articles onto his particular website. So I think some of the Reddit people on that subreddit for World of Warcraft found out that he might have been doing that, so they started creating a fake character called this Glarbo. And as they talked about it more within Reddit, sooner or later, that person who had the website, their articles started to generate articles of Glarbo. And so they really illustrated how you can kind of trick the AI into thinking something's real when it's not, when you're telling it to, this is the information you're to be fed. And so that's a real issue here. And like, what information are we training the model with, right? Second of all, companies are not telling us, Atticus alluded to this a little bit, they are not telling us what they're training their models on. There's a number of reasons they're probably doing that. But that's becoming a real issue too, because as academics, as scholars, many of our faculty are probably going to want to know, where'd you get that information from? That's usually the first question many of us will ask. And if we have no answer to that, it can be problematic, right? And of course, the training can be out of date, right? I bet if we ask the free version of ChatGPT about the current Israeli and Hamas conflict, it's not going to have any idea. Why? Because its training data only went up to 2021. And so it's really not going to know. And so how much information and is it out of date or what's going on there can be an issue. Yeah. Second of all, so disinformation is a big one in censorship. The second ethical implication we need to deal with is implicit bias, right? As Atticus had mentioned earlier, humans are still part of the training process of the ChatGPT and other kinds of generative AI tools. Humans are still part of this training process, and with that, their unconscious bias will exist. On top of that, of course, what we are feeding them leads into this too. So what kind of information are we feeding them? Very Western-oriented, English, and the bias that comes with Twitter posts and Reddit subreddits and Quora, these kinds of websites can elicit huge amounts of bias that again will get fed into the generative AI tool. The Center for Teaching and Teaching Innovation over at Cornell University, we really like this quote here, and I think it's important that we kind of talk about this with our faculty, and I think more importantly with our students, as we stress that the LLM, the large language models that drive generative AI, are only as inclusive and equitable as the information informing them. I think that's a succinct way to kind of illustrate the problem of what we're feeding them, on top of the human element of training. Other things to kind of deal with when it comes to implicit bias, facial recognition softwares are starting to pop up here, right? Language biases are an issue. The Scientific American, of course, had this article on police facial recognitions can't tell Black people apart. And that's a real problem. We've got a profiling issue right off the bat here. Language bias. A lot of these plagiarism checkers that used AI were actually flagging non-native English speakers as AI-generated text. And you can imagine somebody who's still trying to learn English in a lot of our institutions and getting flagged for this kind of thing and how to deal with it. That could be really disconcerting and, frankly, I think demotivating to a large degree for someone who's really is struggling with learning the English language. And so that's a big issue. And so we have to kind of deal with that, the biases that exist within that. Third, right, disinformation, we have bias issues here. And then, of course, the copyright and ownership problem, right? Back to the information that we feed and train the AI with. Who owns this information? Who's created it? And are they compensated well for it? Blanket statement is no, but who knows what's going on there, right? Lots of novelists, we're starting to see some suits some lawsuits come up against ChatGPT from a number of novelists. And here in this particular article, it'll kind of lay out that issue for us in large. It's a nice succinct article about this particular issue. So are they being compensated for the information they're creating? The images, like with DALL-E or Midjourney, are we being compensated for that? So content creators are being affected, I think even more than when they were being affected when the search tools were taking all the ad revenue and the actual content creators were losing ad revenue. And so what we were searching for is starting not to exist because nobody can get paid to create things. It's kind of a vicious cycle to some degree. So that's one particular issue with copyright and ownership, and that's something we have to think about as we're discussing the generative AI tools. Next. And again, will the companies, these generative AI companies, let us know about their data sets and their sources? This is a huge, huge problem. I would argue it's a big problem for academics. It's a big problem for anyone doing serious research on a topic. If I don't know where the information is coming from, using it to generate answers that I would present out to other sources is just a big red flag problem. Right in here, in this Atlantic article kind of gets at the around 200,000 books that ChatGPT kind of modeled itself on without paying any of these authors to use those texts. So are they going to provide that information? Transparency is a big deal with this kind of thing, and I think this is a real big one that we can discuss with our students. You know, how do we know where the information is coming from, who's getting paid, that kind of thing. And then last, I've kind of picked out 4 basic ideas, right? The last one being privacy here. Privacy is a pretty big deal with regards to this, personally identifiable information issues with identity theft, manipulation and surveillance problems, and of course, discrimination. Discrimination in all its forms probably is another thing to deal with here. In terms of identity theft, the more that we provide the information, so one of the things that these tools can do is sometimes you feel like you're talking to a human. And sometimes people will divulge way too much information to the generative AI tool. The problem is, as soon as you type something in that tool, that information is started to use to train it. And so we're starting to train that's an addition to the training model, is when we type something in, it'll take that in and learn from it and then start incorporating that into its answers. And that could be your birth date and social security number if you gave it that much, or other kinds of identifiable information by you. That can be a real big issue. So the saving of the conversations that you've had with them, it can use them again in its learning model. With manipulation and surveillance, these 2 companies, PimEyes and Clearview AI, there's some real major issues with this one. So much so that I've read that Google and Microsoft and even Meta wanted nothing to do with it, right? They kind of washed their hands of it. And they want nothing to do with it, but a couple of companies did try to produce it. I think Clearview AI was having problems with, unable to distinguish between Black people, and PimEyes scrapes the internet for images of a particular person and can kind of triangulate and find out who that person might be just based off some random photographs. These are particularly weird and striking. I haven't actually tried one of these, but some of the articles that I've read about it, they seem really problematic. So this manipulation and surveillance is a problem too that we have to generally kind of think about. And of course, discrimination, not only bias that might exist and particular racist language and these kinds of things, but even some more general things that kind of everyone has to deal with, right? If it knows your medical records, well, insurance companies decide statistically you're uninsurable, right, based on your medical records. Is that ethical? Is that something that we want to go on in our insurance practices and all these kinds of things? These are issues we have to kind of deal with. Even financial information, that could be also an issue. And one of the things too is I've been reading a few things about the problem of, if I say I want my information out of the large language model, many of the articles that I've been reading say they don't know how to do that. There is absolutely no way to get information out. Once it's in, it's kind of, I think Atticus used the word sticky. It's just kind of in there, right? And you can't kind of pull it out or anything like that, because it's now integrated into kind of the learning mechanism there. So other issues. So University of Illinois, their Technology Services Center has a pretty good webpage on some privacy issues around generative AI. And these are some of the issues that they kind of embark on. And I highly recommend this site for all of us, since we are in Illinois here. It might be useful for us to kind of consider, right? All these market forces and competition, these folks want to make money. And so sometimes the ethics around practices could become second to financial security. Again, the copyright and privacy issues on the training data, that can be a real issue, as we mentioned before, and the privacy involved in that. And this oversharing of information can be quite problematic. Profiling problems. So it can start to profile people or profile things based on various categories, but this profiling problem can be an issue with regards to our own privacy. And as librarians, for the fact of the matter is, I think we're the last bastion of any kind of privacy anybody has. and that's even starting to fray a little bit. So in some areas, we have to, have people log into machines where we never had to do that before, or, we try not to keep track of what they read, but that's hard to do when they're reading ebooks and all those things. The corporations are keeping that information. So these can be, real problems, these kind of profiling issues as they come up. Malicious prompt engineering. So, I think Atticus had an example and a number of things that I've seen him do on asking my grandma to tell me a story about building napalm, right? My grandma used to tell me about napalm creation because she was a chemist, and she always would put me to bed, that whole story. But you can trick the AI to actually tell you things it's not supposed to with these kinds of malicious prompts that we make. And the prompting is starting to become some kind of job creation, right? How do you prompt the AI well? And that might be something we talk about in libraries and information literacy is great skills in prompting, right? How do we do good prompts if we're going to use these generative AI tools as we get started? And again, I should stress again, transparency and training are essential around these generative AI tools. And it can be important for us as in our various libraries to go after that training mechanism for our faculty members, for our students, so that they know that we're aware of these things. That's the first reason, but also to help them understand them themselves. And those things can be incredibly helpful. So again, we had disinformation, the ethics around that problem, which are fairly straightforward. The ethics around the privacy, of course, copyright and ownership rules, and finally the problem of bias. So these are kind of the ethical implications that we have to kind of deal with here as we think about generative AI and how it affects our work and the work within our institutions. And here we've provided a few kind of high-end resources from, the UN, the European Commission, European Union is far ahead of the United States when it comes to kind of regulatory bodies dealing with artificial intelligence. But the White House's AI Bill of Rights is here too for you. Though in the United States, money talks, and I think that sometimes is the issue. And how good is China at it? I think Atticus mentioned before to me, if China's better at it, we need to keep working at it or something of this nature. So those are the implications of the ethical implications, not all of them, but four larger kind of schemes that we can kind of think about. Other than that, I guess we can open it up for discussion and questions at this point.
I might have to check that course out, sir. I don't think I'm aware of that one. That's interesting. There's a course that's in faculty or taking. Oh, prompt engineering. Interesting. Yeah, I've seen a few of the job postings for those prompt engineers, and some of them are for prompt engineers and librarians. It's very interesting. I think a lot of our institutions, if I were guessing, in the next few years are going to maybe lean into generative AI a bit more, just because there seems to be a demand on the job market. There's a lot of corporations and companies that say they want their employees entering the workforce to know how to use this technology for better or for worse, given some of the things we've covered today and others. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Hi guys, this is Shakina Lawrence from Triton College. I have a quick question. It seems that when we're talking about ChatGPT and AI, it really is determinant on how people receive it based on what's being presented. So as an example, this presentation today, which was really great, I so appreciate it. Atticus, I think I've seen portions of this presentation about 3 times because I'm just trying to really learn from you guys. And so like part 1 of the presentation shows all of these baselines of how it came to be, how we can use it. And it's like, oh, wow, this seems kind of great. This is like something I really want to learn. And then part 2 of the presentation, we start seeing all of these other things that are like really borderline scary. It makes it a little intimidating. Yeah. So as we begin to present this type of information on campus, I guess the question I would be asking is, what will be the best way to kind of temper conversations? Because more than likely, most of your faculty and instructor group has heard more of part B of the presentation, and they have kind of just shut off completely. What are some ways that, I'm just looking for suggestions to just be able to say, hey, we know it's not going away. Here are some, I guess, positives or just general suggestions for putting the information out there and finding ways to give people an opportunity to remain open-minded about it.
Yeah, what I've found works, or has at least worked when I've talked about it, is you lead with the positive as much as you can, because many people are aware. I mean, there's so many. Part of the, I guess I'll backtrack a little bit. Part of the problem with this technology is the way all these companies that have developed this tech have led. They're like, well, we just want to put the tool out there, and then it's up to everyone else to deal with all the negative implications, right? It's a very Pandora's box kind of way of dealing with it. We don't want accountability for all the bad it does, but when it does something good, look at all the great that we've done. So if, and I think there's a very real, in the classes I've been in, there are students that say, I don't want to touch this stuff. And I think they're justified for having that view. So I think is going in with a mission to inform rather than a mission to persuade, I think has been the most helpful. There are use cases, there are positive use cases for the technology, but on the same token, there are many concerning parts of it as well. So I think just, it's not the end of the world. I don't think it's the end of higher education, like some of those early articles said. So, start with that. I don't think the entire I believe that the way we do things will change, but I don't think it is as world ending as some of the tech billionaires are saying it is. I also don't think it is not harmful. So I think if we just go forward and say our mission is to inform and inform them first of the positive things, but make sure you're not omitting the negative.
Yeah, and so I think some of the if you want, and so I've used it with students, like, okay, students, let's try Bing Chat. Let's see what it can do for us. And if you encourage them to use it as an assistant, right, maybe it'll generate search terms for me, or maybe it'll brainstorm subtopics of global warming, right? That's useful because then we can take that information and do actual searches for it in the tools of which we're aware of. And again, we're kind of habit building to a large degree. How do we help them use good habits? Because if we try to use it too much, or if we try to have it answer all the questions for us, we have all these problems of bias, privacy, disinformation. So precisely, Atticus said it there. We don't want people to have the same reaction that they had to Wikipedia when that came out. I think that's a large degree of problems that we're starting to see, like, no, you can't ever use it, that kind of stuff. But if we encourage them to kind of, look, this can be helpful in certain situations, right? But in other situations, it's a terrible idea to use because of these ethical implications. The transparency one is really the biggest one. What kind of information are they training on? And they don't want to tell us because of market forces, right? That's a problem for academics, I think, at large. Stick with the positive, but at least illustrate what those ethical implications are around generative AI tools at the moment in history. That could change the problem with this is exhausting because it changes every 6 months. We might have to deal with it all over again and in a different form. Yeah.
Well, I believe, was this a 150? Was that when I was supposed to let you guys go? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
All right. So I think we've kept people a little bit longer. So I appreciate everyone for sticking with us an extra 4 minutes.
Any other questions? I mean, if you
yeah.
guys do have questions, feel free to email us those things. If you want to see some resources, you can send us those messages as well. But again, always ask questions. We're colleagues. We may work across the state, but always ask. We're all colleagues here. So if you have any questions or concerns, or how do you get into the classroom with this kind of information, Atticus and I can help, as well as others.
Can I just add in a quick
Please.
comment from the NILROC side of this? I have to really thank you all for this because we are in the midst of this conversation. It has really heated up in the last couple of weeks at our institution. And I've been to so many webinars, but the University of North Carolina is that it's not scalable to what we're doing or where we're at. So I would really encourage continued conversation and places within NILROC where we can have these continued conversations on this topic, because I think we're all kind of in the same boat with this. And so I hope there are more opportunities that we can have within this.
That's a great point, Amy. Always inform. Remember to tell your faculty, we don't have the answers, but we have some information and some better questions we maybe can ask about it, right? It's not a dire situation, as Atticus mentioned. It's not the end of education, so we can calm down a little, right?
Okay. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, good.